Alright guys, here is part 2 of the Monroe administration. So, the young republic begins experiencing its first economic depression when the Panic of 1819 led to a prolonged financial slowdown. Like most economic collapses, it results from greed. Too many people are trying to get rich too quickly. After the War of 1812, Europeans' demand for Americans' products, especially tobacco, cotton, and flour, soared. Farmers and planters began increasing production to meet this. Now, to fuel the roaring post-war economy, unsounded local and state banks began making it easy, far too easy, for people and businesses to get loans. So the Panic of 1819 is ignited by the sudden collapse of cotton prices, because these British textile mills suddenly quit buying America's high-priced cotton. As the price of cotton fell, it was especially devastating for Southern planters, but it also reduced the world's demand for other American goods. So owners of new factories and mills over in New England, New York, and Pennsylvania are also struggling to find markets. So that, plus the equally reckless lending practices of banks, just compound this problem and equates to this Panic of 1819. Now, in the midst, though, of this financial panic, there is another dark cloud that is appearing on the horizon. You have this onset of the fierce controversy over the expansion of slavery into Western territories. So the possibility of Western territories becoming slave states creates the greatest political debate of the 19th century. By 1819, the country had an equal number of slave and free states, 11 of each. The Northwest Ordinance, 1787, had banned slavery north of the Ohio River, and the Southwest Ordinance of 1790 had authorized slavery south of it. Now, west of the Mississippi, however, slavery had existed since France and Spain first colonized the area. So, you have some questionable things going on. In 1819, Missouri Territory residents finally apply for statehood. Now, this is a problem because it would knock off that balance that I said, that 11-11 balance. See, if Northerners were worried if they made Missouri a slave state, that slaveholders in the South would take advantage of that to control Congress. And Southerners were worried with the addition of Missouri as a free state that it's going to tip that power, and then Northern states will try and introduce more anti-slavery bills. So, what ends up happening, what is the Missouri Compromise, is that they agree to allow Maine, who was originally part of Massachusetts, they also want to apply for statehood at about the same time. So the Senate decides to link Maine's request for statehood to Missouri's request for statehood. So in doing that, they admit Maine as a free state and Missouri as a slave state, thus maintaining that political balance between free and slave states. Now, it's not perfect. In fact, what ends up happening is that Missouri, the Missouri Compromise almost completely unravels because Missouri is wanting to introduce a pro-slavery faction in Missouri, wanting to introduce a provision to their state constitution which would exclude free blacks and mulattoes, that is mixed race people, from residing in the state. So this basically almost unravels this. Now, Henry Clay fashions a second Missouri Compromise, you could say, in which Missouri would be admitted only if its legislator would pledge to never deny free blacks their constitutional rights. So they do eventually agree to it, which is why August 10th, 1821, Missouri is admitted and becomes the 24th state, and the 12th one where slavery is allowed. And finally, obviously, one of the most important diplomatic policies is created by President Monroe and Secretary of State John Quincy Adams. And it involved a determined effort to prevent any future European colonialism in the Western Hemisphere. See, the Spanish, British, French, Portuguese, Dutch, and Russians still controlled one or more colonies in the Americas. Now, there's a lot of turmoil going on. Remember, we did speak about the different Latin American revolutions. But Monroe, with Adams, agrees that they need to basically say that at this point, Europe needs to stay out of colonizing the Americas. So, in his inaugural address to Congress in December of 1823, after he wins the second term, his first term is referred to as the era of good feeling, even though you do have the Panic of 1819, and he wins his second term. Okay, in this message to Congress, he outlined 4 major points of what became known as the Monroe Doctrine. Okay, 1, that the American continents, that is North and South America, are henceforth not to be considered as subjects for future colonization by any European power. Okay, so Europe can no longer colonize in the Americas. Number 2, that the United States would consider any attempt by a European nation to intervene in the Western Hemisphere as a danger to our peace and safety. So the United States would consider it basically a grave insult and an attempt to hurt and destroy peace and safety for them if Europe did try to get involved. Number 3, that the United States would not interfere with existing European-controlled colonies in the Americas. Remember, countries like Russia still had Alaska and such at this time. So they're saying, you already exist and control these colonies, that's fine, just you cannot colonize new ones. And then number 4, that the United States would keep out of the internal affairs of European nations. So really, number 4 is just that reiteration of Washington's policy of staying out of Europe's affairs. Now, technically, European nations, they don't recognize the validity of the Monroe Doctrine. To this day, it has no official standing in international law. It's not really a law. It is just symbolically an important statement of American intentions to prevent European involvement in the Western Hemisphere. And it does work. It does work. Since it was announced, not a single Latin American nation has lost its independence to an outside invader. So while technically it has no legal standing, it did work. Those intentions were definitely drawn that America would not stand, the United States would not stand for Europe to become involved with the Western Hemisphere anymore. Okay? And that is the end of the Monroe administration.